Can you just introduce yourself real quick and then tell me a little bit about yourself?
You bet. Terry Ott, Cal Poly computer science grad in 2000. I have been in the computer industry, obviously, since I finished grad school in 2004, and then have been working in the government space since 2008.
Awesome. What is it that you do in the government space?
That's one of those that I have to be a little bit careful, but we can talk about it generalities.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been writing software to support government customers, both defense and intelligence,
Mhm.
since 2008. I can say at a high level, safely, that it's a mix of I have done cyber. I can even say I have done offensive cyber. We didn't used to be able to say that, but we can say that now. Did some of that, did what we call intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or we use the letters ISR, but
Mhm.
in general, those are devices usually with things like antennas or cameras hanging off of them. And they go watch the world where we can't afford to have people 24/7,
Mhm.
and try to find out if everything's still cool there. And they phone home if not everything is cool. So did some of that. But yeah, then came out to DC in 2015, or Northern Virginia, whatever you want to call it, and have done really a mix of things. Bounced around more than I wanted to, but that seems to be kind of the industry out here.
Mhm.
So I've done some geospatial, so writing software to deal with map data. We were dealing with entire globe set of data. So that was a lot of it. Yeah, that was fun. That was the biggest data I have dealt with. Then I did some signal processing for the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO. So that is the government agency that fires and maintains what we can say is, yeah, intelligence satellites, spy satellites, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
So a mix of things on those, but it's very public that there are things like cameras up there, there are radar dishes up there. So all of that data has to come back to the ground and be processed. So I wrote software to deal with that data stream, which is very large and
Mhm.
very important. You don't like it when that software crashes.
No.
But it was a good challenge.
Yeah.
I then spent 2 years working for a British gaming company, which didn't seem to make sense. But it actually does make perfect sense. It turns out they had the back-end technology to do massively multiplayer games. And they had just gotten a bunch of funding, and there's a lot of overlap between that and military training.
Mhm.
The training systems for the military in general aren't great. That's being kind. A lot of times, like the training systems at most can have like 100 things that are moving around at one time.
Mhm.
And anyone who has been in an area of interest, there we go, will tell you that if you can only have 100 things moving around at one time, that is not realistic training. That is not, that's not a usual war zone, battle zone, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, we worked on getting military simulation and training working with a lot more dynamic entities, like tens of thousands.
Mhm.
So we could actually simulate entire cities with people walking around in taxis and all of that kind of stuff. So that was a lot of fun. Then I spent 2 years at AWS, actually, which was not government work. That was just purely commercial work, working for the Route 53 team, which does DNS. That was an awesome challenge. Definitely bigger scale than I have ever touched. We were working on a system that is not yet public, so we won't go into detail, but I can say that it is a system. It'll be Route 53's first external facing system. So all of their DNS is internal facing right now. So you need like a VPC in order to hit that DNS. This one will actually be internet facing. So you don't need a VPC in order to use their DNS service. And so that is one where we needed to scale it up to millions of packets per second globally, and also deal with all of the new threats that come when you are facing the internet. AWS definitely hits nation state actors that try to take AWS down.
Right.
And so it is a different threat model. But then since November of last year, I have been a director at a small company called Cohere here in Northern Virginia. So getting back into the defense space, the government space, so trying to help military and intelligence customers solve their hardest problems.
Awesome. That was a very good overview. And then can you tell me a little bit about your time at Cal Poly and how it has helped you in your professional development?
Immensely and in many, many ways.
Mhm.
One of the things, so I had mentioned that I went to grad school. So after I finished at Cal Poly, I went to, I'll just say, since we're recording, I will say another institution, but whatever. You can Google me if you want to find out who it was.
Mhm.
It was interesting since that was only the second university I had been involved with.
Mhm.
Things that, I taught undergrads while I was a grad student. So I got to teach undergrad CS, and I didn't know how different Cal Poly's education was, and in my opinion, different in a better way.
Mhm.
So things like, I think it's still the case, last I heard it's still the case, that every single CS class requires you to have at least one group project. Um, uh, at the other university that I almost just named, there was only one class that had a group project, and it was an optional class. So
Wow.
a lot of people came out without ever having really worked with other people.
Mhm.
And that is definitely a weakness when you hit industry. So Cal Poly, in my opinion, was much, much stronger in getting you ready for industry. The other thing is, when I was a grad student, I was teaching what are known as recitations. And when I was told I was teaching a recitation, I actually had to have a very surreal conversation and say, that sounds awesome, but what is that? And everybody else laughed. And I said, I'm not kidding. I've never had one of those before. And it turns out that the intro CS class was 400 students. And so in order to give
Wow.
you a place to ask questions, they had to break it down into groups of like 30. And that was the stuff that was taught by the grad students.
Right.
At Cal Poly, I never had a CS class bigger than 30. And some of my senior level classes were like 5 or 7. That is one where having that direct personal contact with a professor, with a lot of professors, was a huge positive.
Mhm.
Being able to go to office hours and have them actually recognize you is a really good thing. And sometimes they even knew my name. The last thing I would say is the senior projects were awesome.
Mhm.
It's another one that is very, very focused on getting industry experience while you are still in school. That turns out that's not at all common across the educational institutions. And it was really helpful when I was actually interviewing at the end of Cal Poly for internships. People pointed out that I should move my senior project out of my education section into my professional experience section because it really is work experience. I could keep going, but I would say those are the top 3, 4 ways that Cal Poly really has had a dramatic impact in my ability to be useful in industry.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I can definitely speak to that as well. I'm about to graduate and I feel very, very ready to go out and start my career now that I've had my education at Cal Poly. I'm very grateful I ended up here.
Um, Out of curiosity, I think, well, I'll just ask it. Are they still requiring you to do internships before you can graduate? Yeah, I can't remember if it was required or heavily encouraged, but for anyone watching this video, heavily encouraged should mean basically mandatory. That is
Yeah.
something that will help you stand out from the crowd. A 4.0 GPA without an internship versus a 3.8 with an internship is an easy hire decision for me. I will take somebody who's been in industry all day long. So
Hmm.
for what it's worth.
And then can you give us a quick overview of some of the companies you started? I looked at your LinkedIn and I saw Public NTP and Six Bucks Solutions LLC. And what inspired you to establish it back in 2008?
Great question. Actually, some of the Cal Poly professors that I worked with, that I mentioned, in those classes of 6 or 7 were key in that. One of the best pieces of career advice I ever got, which had nothing to do, directly with my career, from some of my Cal Poly professors, was a reminder that I was being given an advantage and being given very, very specialized skills that are very, very applicable across the world. And it would be good, if possible, to give some of that back.
Mhm.
You can certainly take all you want from that and try to, get the bigger paychecks and all of that. But they pointed out that it is really satisfying in a lot of ways. And, if you can do it, give some of it back. So started a company called Public NTP, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. So it is a public charity. Just using both my skills and my admittedly very I'll use the word geeky slash nerdy interest in keeping clock synchronized. So like DNS, NTP, Network Time Protocol, sorry, I will expand that out for you, is one that is very cheap to give away. It's one of those that out of pocket, I was able to run NTP servers all around the world and help parts of the world that are less served by internet infrastructure get synchronized clocks. And while that doesn't sound super interesting or important, it is really important in things like security, like making sure all of your clocks are synchronized, lets you line up the logs from various different computers, and you can do things like some of the forensics works that you just can't do if your clocks aren't synchronized. You don't know what happened first and how things unfolded. So that's just one example of many, but yeah, synchronized time is a good thing. So yeah, that's me giving some skills back. And then the other half of it, $6 Solutions. So that was, it is very common, at least in the DC area, and I think in Silicon Valley as well. Pretty much everybody I know out here has a side hustle going on. Yeah, you will get offers to work outside of your 40 hours. I will quickly note for anyone watching this video that it is important before you do that to register that with your employer. You actually can stumble on conflicts of interest faster than you realize. So if you're going to do it, make sure to register it. But I've never had an employer actually have an issue with it, but it's important to get out in front of it. You don't want to surprise them with it.
Right.
And honestly, some job contracts won't let you do side hustle work. It's not common, but you will sometimes hit it. So anyway, yeah. I've started a side hustle, and I'll admit it first, it was my opportunity to kind of build a home for some of the AWS projects I was just doing for fun. But unsurprisingly, it turns out as your network grows, I actually have built a client list now. So I do probably 10 to 20 hours a month, most of little side hustle stuff. And again, it's certainly not a major moneymaker. I don't want it to be a major moneymaker. I already have a full-time job that pays the bills. But it's a good way to help out. Like most of my clients are also friends. So it's an awesome opportunity to kind of keep your skills sharp. And it's nice that when you're your own boss, you get to pick and choose what projects you want to do. So you can find out things that will actually help improve your skills. So yeah, I certainly like staying busy, and between a nonprofit, a full-time job, and a side hustle, I have found a way to stay busy.
Definitely. And then as far as $6 Solutions go, can you tell me about some of the open source projects and like the AWS projects you have worked on since you founded the company?
You bet. So yeah, that really was a place where I threw a lot of my open source stuff. Yeah, it's all public on GitHub. If anybody wants to check out $6, feel free. I'm always available for consulting. I'm kidding. That's not a real sales effort. No, another thing about, kind of giving back to the world, in my opinion, is open source. I think that's a really important thing to do. I try real hard to open source what I can, and I'm happy to report I've even done some open source work for the government, which was surreal. I'll admit that made me nervous. I'm not used to having government customers wanting to advertise the work I was doing for them, but yeah, it's kind of a random collection of stuff. I haven't looked at what's in there for a while, but when we were getting back to the geospatial stuff that we were talking about earlier that I was doing in 2015, one of the problems I was helping the government solve was bringing the OpenStreetMaps data collection into classified networks. And it is interesting that there are tools to do that, but none of them are or at least, again, back to 2015, none of them were optimized. And that makes sense because nobody needed to do that operation. There was a public internet server with all of the holdings on it already, so you didn't need to load up a whole new server, but we did because we were on a network that didn't have any internet connections for very good reasons. I did some work for my employer under that regard. There was stuff I wanted to do that my employer couldn't get the customer to sign off on, but I just talked to my employer and said, we are already doing open source software. Would you have any issue with me building the functionality that I wanted to extend out, but just do it on my own time and open source it to the world? And they were very excited about that. And they actually did take my open source library and add it to their open source library. But yeah, I've done everything from that to very random projects on how to organize photographs after a day of shooting. I'm one of those people that have become a semi or yeah, an advanced amateur. There we go. Travel photographer.
Mm,
So on a given day, I will often shoot 7,000 pictures.
mhm.
Organizing all of that data on trips and stuff is hard. So I just wrote some scripts for myself to handle all that.
Mhm.
And there's no reason why not to open source that data because somebody somewhere might have the same problem.
No, definitely. That actually sounds, that last one specifically sounds super useful. I like to take a lot of pictures too, so that actually could be very useful for me.
We can definitely talk offline. I created a data problem for myself. Yeah, on the last trip I took, I actually took I think it was 1.2 terabytes of pictures.
Wow.
So yeah, just trying to figure out how to store that much data and bring it home from another country. Yeah, I have, like I said, it's still amateur, but I am now playing with some of the technology that pros use. And it's fun to flirt on that line.
That's super cool. And then as Cohere's Director of Modern Enterprise Software Architectures, can you tell me a little bit about some of the key work you have done in creating and modernizing mission critical software systems?
You bet. It is a constant challenge when working for the government that government is almost always the accepted number, and it's very common, is that government computer systems are somewhere between 10 and 15 years behind the cutting edge commercial stuff.
Mhm.
Um, it is 2024. Some of the people that are watching this video are going to laugh when I say this, but it is painfully true. The government is still a little bit afraid of cloud, and they don't really want to, some of the parts of the government don't want to jump all in yet.
Mhm.
In my role, a lot of what I've done since 2017 has been helping the government make that jump. Because some of their on-prem data centers have been costing taxpayers a truly heartbreaking amount of money. Yeah, it's a better use of taxpayer money to move into the cloud in a lot of cases. The other part of it is that we need to move in smartly because everyone who has ever moved into cloud thinks they're going to save money, and then they do their first transition poorly, and it turns out their cloud bill is breathtaking. Yeah, it's been not only helping them move in, but make sure that we do it in a smart way.
Mhm.
It's been everything from I once had a government customer that said, we have 4 servers, each of them have 4 CPUs in them, each of those have 16 cores, so we need VMs that are that big. And I said, no, you probably don't, and you're not going to like the price of it if you do it. So a lot of it is doing things like, they'll talk about right sizing software as you move it up into the cloud. So actually running it and finding out what the resource needs are and finding the right instance types. None of that is groundbreaking, but it is adding a huge amount of value to the government as we do that. And also taking advantage of some of the native technology in the cloud to make the software more resilient. You can do a lot more fault tolerance and actually deal with a VM just completely disappearing underneath you and not impacting the mission.
Mhm.
So a lot of it is that kind of stuff is teaching them it's not just a lift and shift up into the cloud. You can make it cheaper, you can make it faster, you can make it scale a lot better, and you can make it so that mission critical applications effectively, only within so many nines, but between 3, 4, 5 nines,
Mhm.
basically never goes down. And that is something that makes the government very, very happy.
Mhm.
I won't name it, but I can say that I did work on a piece of software that if it was ever down for more than 30 minutes, they had to call the president and wake them up.
Wow.
Making sure software like that doesn't go down for 30 minutes is truly important.
Definitely. That's super cool. Uh,
And also scary.
Very scary. Very scary. It sounds like a lot of pressure.
A little intense. Yeah, we wore pagers.
And if you could share one piece of advice for students looking to pursue a career in cybersecurity, what would it be?
Uh, my advice would be never fall for the trap that you think you understand the industry space of what cyber is.
Mhm.
I was very, very active in offensive cyber in 2008. I can say that we were nation state level cutting edge. We had some tools that were not publicly available. By the time 2011 hit and I was still in that world, none of the tools that we were using were the ones I was using in 2008.
Mhm.
Software in general is moving fast because of the nature of cyber. It moves a lot faster.
Hmm.
So any like, and again, I think most people have been guilty of it. But I remember graduating and thinking, sure, I need to, watch the journals and stuff, but I basically know the fundamentals of my industry.
Hmm.
And when it comes to cyber, that is not true. You need to be learning all the time and constantly, because if you aren't, let me tell you how your adversaries are, and they will win.
Hmm.
Depending on if you're on offensive or defensive side. Yeah, you need to, yeah, either way, you need to be up on not just what's current, but what's going to be coming down the pike within a year. Because a lot of times it takes time in order to build the technology, in order to be ready in time. So, yeah, my advice to anyone in cyber right now is, if you think you are going to be done learning as you are finishing college, please flip that on its head and assume you need to learn faster when you hit industry, not the
Hmm.
other way around.
Definitely. I feel like that's extremely applicable advice to any field, but obviously especially cyber. So that's really good advice. And then what are your favorite tools and resources for someone just getting started out in cybersecurity?
Um, my best advice, honestly, it's going to sound like a dodge, but it's not, is other people.
Hmm.
I can tell you one of the biggest resources that I found in my career, and I was disappointingly late to really finding out the value of it, was mentorships.
Hmm.
Find the people who have more time than you in whatever, company, whatever role you are in. And my advice, you have to do it in the right way, but just ask a lot of questions.
Hmm.
A lot of people will come in and start making statements, and they'll say X is stupid or Y is inefficient. In my opinion, take that as learning opportunities. Say, why do we do it this way? First, it's a lot less aggressive. And B, you may find out there's a really good reason for them to be doing it in a way that looks stupid to you or looks inefficient.
Hmm.
So yeah, be humble, come at it with questions, and then really take advantage of mentorships. I remember as I was finishing college, somebody used the line of, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I remember getting very offended by that, because I thought that knowledge was something that was the most important. And the answer is, it is necessary, but it is not sufficient. A lot of times it really is who you know. So be good, be strong, be competent, but also make sure to work your network. I have gotten jobs because mentors talked to somebody they knew and said, call this guy, he's on the market and he's really good.
Hmm.
Yeah, you can learn a lot from a mentor. Because a lot of software development, amazingly, especially the longer you're in it, has nothing to do with pressing keys on a keyboard. It is basically interpersonal things. You need to get, buy off on important multi-million-dollar systems.
Hmm.
That's not actually coding. That is actually persuading people. And that's one where mentors and things like that can help you with those skills. So yeah, certainly always be sharp on, all of your languages and things like that. Always be adding new languages, but don't miss the human side of software engineering. And people who have more experience than you, offer to buy them a lunch and just pick their brain. That kind of stuff is invaluable.
Awesome. Great advice again. And then one last piece I have for you. We have close to 200 plus players registered to play at today's Space Grand Challenge, all of whom are in middle and high school. Do you have any words of advice you'd like to share with them?
Uh, Good question. Uh, the advice I would just say is, I mean, it's difficult, it's easy to say, it's hard to do. But at least in my experience in cyber, a lot of it is just basic problem solving, and then basic creativity. So make sure to always be challenging your assumptions, to use a little pun off of the grand challenge,
Hmm.
challenge your assumptions. A story I can tell you is, I was on a defensive cyber team once, and so we created a protection for software. We gave it out to our interns. Our interns were our red team, so they were going to penetration test it. They're going to pen test it. Uh, we, as the employees, the full-time employees, were very proud of our protection.
Hmm.
We gave it to our interns who were part-time, and obviously they had less skill with the tools, all of that stuff. It took us 3 weeks, 4 weeks to build the protection, and it took our interns a day and a half to break it.
Wow.
It was heartbreaking, and it turns out They were just creative. They said, you forgot about the C runtime libraries, CRT DLL. It turns out that gets loaded in most Windows executables. So
Mhm.
what we did was create our own CRT DLL and had it load that, and we broke your protection in about 40 seconds. That's one of those that, that's just, thinking sideways, thinking out of the box. That kind of creativity is what is needed in cyber. We were so proud of our protection, except we had totally left the side door wide open. Uh, the other thing I will say is anyone who says there is perfect cybersecurity has never really done cybersecurity. It is a question of when they will break it. So definitely focus on all of your defense in depth. Never put too many eggs in one basket. And be prepared to restore from backups that you actually trust. That is always fun when you restore from backup, and those were compromised too. I've had that happen. Yeah, assume that you're going to get just positively wrecked by the adversary and don't take it personally. It is a game of whack-a-mole, and just make sure you always have a way to restore.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Terry. Really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to having everyone hear this.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time.